time and so much to do, but I know I'll find a way.
Hey guys, I got my scrubs on, which means today is a dye day. So today we're going to be making ombre fiber using iDye poly, using the jar method. It's really bright. The sunlight's really bright. And some jumbo fiber. Now you can use this on other fibers. I'm just using it on jumbo fiber because when I'm done with these, I'm making some dreadlocks for a customer. Some ups and downs about this process. Now I'll be using the jar method, not the stovetop method. That means I'm going to get the water hot on the stove, but then I'm actually going to transfer the hot water into the jar with the dye and the binder itself, and I'll be dip dyeing. And I'm only dip dyeing, of course, part of it because I'm doing an ombre. Now you may ask, well, why aren't you using spray-on petting zoo wig dye for this? Because when you're doing a large volume, it's actually just more efficient to use a dip dye method. I mean, I could spray it on. It would take a really long time, especially because I'm making 75 dreadlocks out of this set. So anyway, let's get started. Because we're going to be doing an ombre, we need to dye the middle of the fiber instead of the ends of the fiber. And in order to keep it so that it stays together, the trick I use is to put 2 loose scrunchies on either side of the middle and cut the rubber band free. Make sure not to cut your fiber while you're at it. Now that you've got the middle, you just move your scrunchies down to the ends, and that'll hold your fiber in place. This is the part we're going to dip, so we need to make sure that there's enough slack. Don't do it too tight. Make sure it's nice and loose so that the dye can penetrate all the way into the center very easily. I'm getting the fiber wet ahead of time to make it easier to dip in the jar. This helps eliminate the air pockets from the middle so it doesn't float when you try to let it down into the jar. And it'll incorporate much better, and it does not adversely affect the dye process at all. Now, when you open up your packet of iPoly, you're going to find the binder and the dye itself. This is a benzyl benzoate. Chemically, it's a binder. It's also used for treating chiggers, oddly enough. So don't touch this with your skin. Not so good. Some people have very severe allergic reactions. Some people just, it doesn't really do anything. But just in case you are in the first group, don't touch it. What I do usually is I take all of the packets from this and I just put them together in a bottle. It makes it easier to dispense because you're not necessarily going to use all of this for every application. So I save it up and I just add it in as needed. My packet of good shape, so it all goes at the bottom. And go ahead and cut this open. I'm just going to put in about 1/3 of the packet. The volume of the dye can be important in getting a darker color, but it really is only in relation to the volume of water that you're putting in with it. So if you're not putting in as much water, you can use less of the dye and just leave the fiber in there for longer. So take my excess, and I always have trouble opening these with gloves on. Put my excess in here, bag it up, and that way I can use it for later. And I'm not going to put the binder in yet until I dissolve this. I'll mix it in after the hot water. Dip, going to about 1/3. Pull it up every once in a while and make sure it actually is straight. And we're just going to let this sit down in there for an hour. You see how it's kind of wicking up a little bit? That's alright because that'll help with our ombre effect. One of the best parts about the jar method is mess control. You can just pick up the jar with your dyed material in it, take it to wherever you want to rinse it, and you don't have to worry about it dripping along the way. Also, you can reuse the dye because it's in the jar. All you have to do is put a lid back on the jar and save it for later. You can heat it back up using a pan you don't care about on the stove, or even in the microwave, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But first off, I'm just going to use a garden hose to rinse this out, and I'm going to rinse it until it runs clear. Now that it's running clear, I'm going to let it drip dry outside with the dyed side down. Whoosh! When reheating the dye for reuse, the stovetop method is really the best way to go. However, if you don't want to ruin a pan, you can do it in the microwave. But you need to take some precautions first. Put something on top of the jar, like cheesecloth or folded over paper towels to act as a filter. Otherwise, you will have dye in steam form penetrating the vents in your microwave and you're never going to get the smell out.
Only microwave it for 30 seconds at a time and test after each round. Test the temperature of the outside of the jar and also test the top to see if it feels moist. If it's moist, that means steam is being released, and it's very likely already at the correct temperature to use. As always, use a thermometer to double check.
So now that the color is dry, you can see we've got this little transition going on here. And it's a pretty clear line, although when this fiber is not in the exact same pattern it is here, it will divide up a bit more. If you want to have a more gradual ombre effect, you could just basically repeat the process and dilute the dye just a little bit, or also not leave it in for as long, and it won't be as potent and you'll get a more gradual color change. You can also do that if you want to have multiple colors, like if for instance I wanted to have black to purple to pink, I could then go back with the purple as the in-between and do the transition that way. So that's all there is to it. This color will remain pretty color fast on the fiber actually. If you want to avoid rub off, follow this up with a wig conditioner, because that way it'll add a little bit of a protective layer of the oil on top so it won't transfer off as easily. However, do look out that you don't put something that's got a bunch of alcohol in it, or you're going to have the same problem that's actually going to make it worse coming off. So there you go. I hope this was helpful for you guys, and happy dyeing!